إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أما بعد. So today, my brothers and sisters, here at Masjid Sunnah An in Aston in Birmingham, today which is the date 28th of Qaaidah 1445 after the Hijrah, which coincides with Wednesday the 5th of June 2024 in the Common Era. So we're going to begin, inshallah, the dars today, and we're going to continue, inshallah, so long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes that easy and wills that for us. An explanation of the book Umdahtul ahkaam min kalami khairil anam, which is the book of the great scholar Al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani Al-Maqdisi rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 600 after the Hijrah. Al-Maqdisi, of course, being a reference and a connection or a ascription to Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis, because that is the area that the author rahimahullah ta'ala, that he lived in that region, as we shall come to know inshallah. The explanation is Tadhkirul Anam bi Fawaid Umdatul Ahkam, which is the explanation, a brief explanation of every point, even though it is a nice thick volume by the great scholar and the jurist and the head of the judiciary in this age before he died, rahimahullah, Sheikh Salih bin Muhammad Luhaydan, rahimahullah ta'ala. And this book was taught by him in Riyadh for a period of time before his death, rahimahullah ta'ala. And as we mentioned, the book itself is a book on the Islamic regulations or the fiqh of al-Islam, meaning those affairs that are connected to our everyday lives in terms of ibadah, the pillars of Islam, and other than that, such as the affairs of marriage and divorce, and the affairs of janazah, for example, and other than that, dress code, eating, what is halal, what is haram. So the author, as we mentioned, of the original work, who died in 600 after the Hijrah, rahimahullah ta'ala, we are now in 1445. So that gives you an idea of the era that he lived in as compared to our era today. And he is Al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani bin Abdul Wahid Al-Maqdisi Al-Hanbali. So he ascribed himself to the madhab of the Hanabila. But that does not change the fact that he was actually Ahlul Hadith, that he was a great scholar of Hadith and Sunnah, as we shall come to know. So I'll begin, because I'm only spending, inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, I'm only spending half an hour every week on this book before we move on to the next book, half an hour each, inshallah. So, inshallah, I hope that the brothers and sisters are taking notes, so they are paying attention. You may have to return back to the recording if I go through quite quickly some of the points that are going to be discussed, inshallah. So we'll begin with the tarjama of the Imām, which is the biography of the Imām, rahimahullah ta'ala, Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah. So his name and his description. So he is the Imām, the Hafidh, meaning that he is the great scholar, and he is the great memorizer. Taqiyuddin, Abu Muhammad. So his kunya is Abu Muhammad, the father of Muhammad, Abdul Ghani bin Abdul Wahid. So he is Abdul Ghani, the son of Abdul Wahid, Ibn Ali, Ibn Surur, Al-Maqdisi, Al-Jamma'ili. And Dimashqi, also Al-Hanbali. So he is Jamma'ili because of the fact that he ascribed himself to the city of Jamma'il, which is from a village in the mountains, or the mountain Nablus, which is Nablus of today. In the anglicized or Latinized name for it is Nablus. And it is, of course, present today in the West Bank of Palestine. It is in the West Bank of Palestine. So he ascribed himself to Baytul Maqdis, so he is Maqdisi, due to the nearness of Jamma'il to Jerusalem. So Baytul Maqdis, or Jerusalem, is not far from Jamma'il, which is the place where he is from originally. So he ascribes himself to that. And that is because Nablus and its outlying villages are connected to Baytul Maqdis. And between the two, there is only a day's journey. He is Dimashqi, also Damascus, because of the fact that he resided there also. And he's Hanbali because of the fact that he ascribes himself to the fiqh of Imam Ahmad. And of course, when we talk about the fiqh, meaning in the principles of fiqh, that he ascribes himself to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, not that he is a muqallid, as you shall come to know, inshallah. Furthermore, in Aqeedah, of course, when we say that he is Hanbali, we don't mean that he is Hanbali in Aqeedah, because the Imams of Ahlul Hadith, all of their Aqeedah or their creed is one creed. So he was born in the region of Jamma'il, 49 kilometers or so north of Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in Nablus, or Nablus of today. And he was born in the year 541 after the Hijrah of Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So he's from the 6th century. Thereafter, he moved with his family from Jerusalem to Damascus. And that's why he is given the ascription to his name of Dimashqi. From that which increased, or rather his family, his a'ila, was a family, or his family was one of knowledge and goodness. They are known. His family was known to be a family who gave importance to knowledge and to rectification and goodness, meaning goodness of the religion. And from that which increased the strength of his religion and his religious upbringing and knowledge was the presence of a healthy rivalry in age and learning. And that was alongside, because of the fact of his companionship, was with the son of his maternal aunt. And he is Muwaffiquddin ibn Qudama, the great Imam, Al-Hafid, the great scholar, the author of Al-Mughni, published in 15 volumes, a tremendous book of fiqh. And it is, every student of knowledge, I would encourage them to grab hold of this book and put it in your library, Al-Mughni of Muwaffiquddin ibn Qudama. And he is the first cousin, the son of the maternal aunt of the author of this work, and he is Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. So Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi accompanied Muwaffiquddin ibn Qudama on his travels in seeking knowledge. The importance of having a companion when you are pursuing knowledge, my brothers and sisters. As for his early learning, then Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi was raised in a household of knowledge, piety and goodness. And he was guided to seek knowledge at a very young age. Rahimahullah ta'ala, at a very young age. And he studied under the head of his family. So this is the early life of Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. And Al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani and Al-Hafidh Ibn Qudama were both born in 541 after the Hijrah. So they were born in the same year. So that's his companion and his first cousin. Both of them great ulama and imams of the Sunnah. And their mothers were sisters. Both authored a book in fiqh entitled Al-Umdah. Al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani, however, died in 600. So the author of Umdahtul ahkaam, the book that we are studying, he died in the year 600 after the Hijrah. And Al-Hafidh ibn Qudama died 20 years later, 2 decades later, in 620 after the Hijrah. Nevertheless, Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, he studied under the head of his family, the chief of his family, Al-Allama, the great scholar, the Sheikh Muhammad bin Ahmad ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi Abu Umar. And he studied under the father of his companion. Who was his companion that we mentioned? Muwafaquddin ibn Qudama, the author of Al-Mughni. So Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi studied under the father of his first cousin, who was also a scholar. So he also studied thereafter under the shuyukh of Damascus and the ulama of Damascus. And he took from them, or he gained from them in his knowledge, the sciences of fiqh and fiqh itself. And other than that, from the other Islamic sciences and the other subject matters of Islam. And from those he studied under was Abu al-Makarim ibn Hilal. He traveled extensively in pursuit of knowledge. Another important distinguishing sign that we know from the ulama of the Salaf and the ulama of our times, that they would travel to seek knowledge. It is something that is rare in our times, because people today think that they can gain knowledge just by clicking on their computer screens and learn all they need to learn about ilm just through things such as YouTube or Facebook or whatever, or just sitting at home and listening to lectures being broadcast. The ulama of the Salaf, they would not settle for just gathering books, because they could have done that. Just go and gather books and just read through the books and claim that they have become ulama just by reading the books. Or not even leave their townships. But this wasn't the case with the ulama. In a time when there were no cars, and there was not any automotive travel, such as airplanes and trains and cars and so on. So how would they travel except by riding beast or by walking? So they would travel by camel or by horse or even by mule or on their feet. And they would travel from land to land. And in that regard, Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah ta'ala, was no different in that regard. He traveled extensively, just like the Salaf. Because imagine, this is a man, in the 500s after the Hijrah, following the footsteps of those scholars who came before him 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, 500 years before him. The likes of Imam Malik, or the likes of Sufyan al-Thawri, or the likes of Imam al-Awza'i, or the likes of, Hammad ibn Salama, or the likes of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, to whose madhab he ascribed himself. That they would travel, that they would make huge journeys in pursuit of knowledge, even for a singular hadith. That the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, such as Abu Ayyub and others, that it is known from them that they would travel for a month's journey, that they would buy a riding beast just for the purpose of that one journey. So they would buy a riding beast, they would get their provisions together, and they would travel from Damascus or from Medina all the way to Damascus, or on occasion with some of the Sahaba or one of the Sahaba, they travel from Medina all the way to Egypt just to gather one hadith of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So this sunnah of traveling in pursuit of knowledge, or to be reminded of knowledge. I mean, these are Sahaba, they were ulama themselves, yet they would travel to gather one hadith. In fact, one of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, one of them, he said that he traveled for a whole month's journey because of a hadith that he'd already heard. He said, I heard this hadith, but I wanted to come to ask you, did you hear this from Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It's not that he didn't know the hadith, he knew the hadith. I just wanted to confirm that you are the one who narrated this hadith from Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, didn't you come for any other reason? He said, for no other reason. He said, you didn't come for any trade or anything like that? He said, no, just for this one hadith. So he narrated the hadith to him regarding the one who treads a path in pursuit of knowledge, that Allah makes easy for him the path to Jannah. And then once he had learnt the hadith, he got onto the back of his riding beast again and he traveled back to Medina. This sunnah of traveling to seek knowledge, or to be reminded of knowledge, or to sit in the gatherings of knowledge, or to sit with the scholars, before they die and before they pass away is something that is extremely and immensely imperative, my brothers and sisters, that we do not miss out upon these opportunities. Barakallahu feekum. So he traveled extensively in seeking knowledge and acquiring knowledge of the Sharia, knowledge of Hadith, visiting many lands. He sought knowledge from the scholars of Damascus, which is of course modern day the Levant in Syria, Alexandria in Egypt, in the northern part of Egypt, in Jerusalem, in Baghdad, in Harran, in Mosul, in Iraq, and so on. So this is the way of the Salaf, barakallahu feekum. So if a person truly wants to be a seeker of knowledge, and especially if you're young, and you have energy and you have strength, then what is it that prevents you from going and seeking knowledge? Spending a few months with one alim, spending a few months with another alim, spending years, as some of the Salaf would do, spend 7, 8 years with a scholar in pursuit of ilm. So the age that he lived in, barakallahu feekum, was the age of the ruler al-muqtafi li amrillah. So he was the ruler, so he was the caliph or the king from Banu al-Abbas, from the Khilafah Abbasiyya or the Abbasid Caliphate. It was the age towards that time when the weakness of the Abbasid Caliphate was taking place, and it was in decline. And its decline can really be put down, if a person really wants to ponder, it can be put down to the fact that it started, the Abbasids, that they started translating the works of the Greeks and the philosophers such as Aristotle and Plato and Plotinus and others, and the works of the Romans and the Hindus and mythology of India and other places, that they started translating it into the Arabic language. A few centuries earlier, because this is, of course, as we mentioned, that Abdul Ghani was born in what year, did I say? 541. What is referred to as the translation movement began actually 3 centuries earlier, in the 200s, around about 218 or so, under Al-Ma'mun, who was from the earlier caliphs of Banu al-Abbas, of the Abbasid Caliphate. And they set up a library, and it is differed over who exactly set up the library, but it is possible that it was Al-Ma'mun, and most probable that it was Al-Ma'mun. Him, alongside the evil and wicked innovating scholar, Shaitan, Bishr al-Marisi. So, this house of knowledge, which they referred to as what? Anyone know what it was called? Bayt al-Hikmah. Bayt al-Hikmah. Bayt al-Hikmah was actually possibly the biggest library of its time, or even before its time, right up until possibly the modern age. So it was right in the middle of Baghdad, and Baghdad was the seat of power. It was possibly in its time, it can safely be said, it was possibly the biggest city in the world. It was a huge metropolis of people of all types and all backgrounds and all races. And Bayt al-Hikmah was set up really in a period of time where they wanted to gather the knowledge of the world and put it into one library called Bayt al-Hikmah. Bayt al-Hikmah, many of the scholars, they mentioned that it wasn't actually named after any Islamic principle, but it was actually named after the philosophy of the Greeks. Because the term philosophy, philosophy, of course, if you know what the word philo means, it means to love something. And philosophy is the love of wisdom. So Bayt al-Hikmah, which is the house of wisdom, was really there to encourage the translation of the works of philosophy of antiquity and the Greeks in particular. So many of the writings of the Greeks that had been lost to the Europeans, because the Europeans were living in the Dark Ages and practically living in caves, or just coming out of the caves, because of their lifestyles. So the Arab world and the Islamic world was seen as extremely advanced as compared to Europe that was still in the Dark Ages. So they set up this library and what they referred to as the translation movement. And the translation movement its purpose was to translate everything that they could find, especially from the Greeks, whether it be science, whether it be the philosophies of the ancient Greek philosophers, whether it be the math and the astronomy and the astrology, and translate it into the Arabic language. And therefore, you have the age of the polymaths amongst the Arabs. They weren't all Muslim, of course. Some of them were Christian, some of them were Jewish, some of them were even fire worshippers, the Majus, and so on. So those works were translated. And the first of the Arab philosophers, or what is referred to today as the Muslim philosophers, was an individual known as Al-Kindi. Al-Kindi was alive in the time of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He was there and present. Now, as these works were being translated over centuries, you can imagine the effect that would have had upon the theology and the religion and the beliefs of the Muslims. So over a period of time, Muslims started turning towards philosophy of the ancient Greeks and trying to fuse it with Islamic creed and Islamic beliefs. And that took a period of time, because this is, of course, from the development of the Jahmiyyah in its early times, and then the Mu'tazila, and then the effect of the likes of Al-Kindi, because if you recall the Mu'tazila, that they were founded in the 1st century, in the time of Al-Hasan al-Basri, in the time of the Tabi'een. Then the Jahmiyyah under Ja'd ibn Dirham and Jahm bin Safwan, who were executed 124 and 128 respectively. Then you have the rise of the Kullabiyya, and then the Ash'ari movement thereafter. Then you have the translation movement and the rise of the Arab philosophers. Al-Kindi, the first of them, and he is referred to as the first of the Arab philosophers. After him, Al-Farabi, and then after him, Ibn Sina. And especially Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, Ibn Taymiyyah and others, they refer to them and they declare them to be kuffar outside the fold of Islam. And then you have the likes of the Ismailiyya, or the Ismaili Shia, who came after following the elder son of Ja'far al-Sadiq, out of which come the Seveners, because the 6th Imam of the Shia was Ja'far al-Sadiq. The 7th Imam, according to the Ismailis, and this is the only Shia state that ever existed in the Middle Ages and in the early part of Islam. No Shia state up until Iran, the Shiite Kufr Taghuti Republic of Iran, was established by Al-Khomeini in 1979. There was only one period of time that the Shia, they had any authority in the Muslim world. And that was under the Fatimids. Now the Fatimids, or the Fatimiyya, were actually Ismailis. They weren't Twelvers. They weren't Ithna Ashariya of those that you see today in Iran. These were actually more extreme than them, because they were fully and openly the followers of Neoplatonism. They were kuffar. They rejected all of the attributes of Allah, all of the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Absolutely. In fact, they wouldn't ascribe a single attribute to Allah. They believed in the monism of the Neoplatonists of the 3rd century after the Common Era. So they were outright outside the fold of Islam. Yet they ruled North Africa and parts of the southern side of Iraq and so on. So the Abbasids, you can see how their decline came about. And it continued. So this ruler, Al-Muqtafi li Amrillah, then he ruled up until 555 after the Hijrah. Baghdad was eventually invaded and conquered by the Mongol forces in the year 656. So Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, when did he die, did we say? 600. When did his first cousin die? 620. What was his name? Muwafaquddin ibn Qudama. So the Mongol forces eventually, they entered Baghdad in 656 after the Hijrah. We're in the final Abbasid Caliph, so only a century later. So this is like 56 years after the death of Abdul Ghani. Right, 56 years, or let's say 36 years after the death of Muwaffaq-ud-Din. So it shows what kind of decline Banu al-Abbas encountered because of the fact that they had no more, they never had a strong hold on the Sunnah anymore. Since Al-Mutawakkil, and maybe one or two other than him, Al-Mutawakkil, of course, supported Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, freed him, and gave strength to Ahlul Hadith and Ahlul Sunnah. And then within a generation or two, by the time of Al-Barbahari, rahimahullah, those of you who know, Imam Al-Barbahari, Imam of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, in his age, died in 300 and what? 29. Died in 329 after the Hijrah. That he died in exile. He died in hiding, in reality. So it was a very short period of time between Imam Ahmad and the revival of Ahlul Hadith. And before Ahlul Bid'ah, they started working on the rulers again. And that the decline of the people of Sunnah began. Not decline in the terms of that they weren't active. They were active. But Ahlul Bid'ah conspired against them using the forces of the rulers. And the people of Sunnah, that they were weakened. They were weakened. And the Abbasid Caliphate continued to weaken up until the Rafida, alongside their pact with the Mongol hordes under Halukh Khan, and he was the grandson of Genghis Khan, as you probably refer to him in the West. Genghis Khan, he had a grandson, Halukh Khan. Halukh Khan invaded with his army Baghdad, and the qissa is a very distressing and a very terrible story if one reads what they did in Baghdad. Eventually, they took the caliph at the time, who was Musta'sim Billah, and the Mongols had this idea in their minds that you can't kill a king. Like, it is not permissible to kill a king, because if you kill a king, then you are cursed by your ancestors and so on. So what did they do instead? They said, okay, we can't kill him with our hands, so they trampled him with horses. And they basically committed a genocide, if you want to call it a genocide, but they basically killed all of the Muslims that they could get hold of in Baghdad. Hundreds and thousands of them, filling the streets of Baghdad with blood, up until the rivers that were flowing alongside the city of Baghdad flowed red with the blood of Muslims. And that was the end of Banu al-Abbas. Going back to Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, then there are a number of historical events. There are a number of historical events that took place in his time. And I'll just mention maybe 4 or 5 of them. Number one, you know that, of course, in the time of Banu al-Abbas, that there was a parallel caliphate running in Spain. So these were 2 caliphates, in essence, one in Spain, Andalus, and one in, his seat of power was in Baghdad. So the Baghdad were Banu al-Abbas, and in Andalus there was a separate caliphate. So there were battles that were taking place in Spain, because Spain was, the Spanish Muslims, they were trying to hold back, or the Muslims of Spain, they were trying to hold back the attacks of the Christians of Europe. So there were territories that were being lost, and eventually the Muslims were able to face the invaders, and they were given victory in Spain. So Spain survived for a few more centuries, up until 1492, when the Spanish Inquisition began, or the Spanish reconquering of Spain, or the Christian reconquering of Spain began, and the Muslims were expelled from Spain altogether, and they were forced back into North Africa. And as for the Muslims who remained in Spain post 1492 Common Era, that they were basically forced to embrace Christianity or hide their religion, which they couldn't hide for too long, so they were basically assimilated and they became Christians. Wallahu musta'an. Some of the other events that took place, that which befell Egypt of drought and the withholding of rain and pestilence and terrible diseases that were widespread in that time. And many households were destroyed, and that was in the year 596 after the Hijrah. And in a single day, in Cairo alone, there were 500 funerals. Now, you have to think about the era that they were living in. These weren't multi-million populated cities like they are today. Like you find a city like Birmingham, a few million. A city like London, maybe 10 million. A city like Karachi, 44 million. Right? So those weren't like these types of cities. These were cities that would have at most maybe 1 million people, a few 100,000. So 500 funerals in a single day because of a pestilence and because of a disease was a big, calamity. Other things that were occurring, and remember, we're mentioning places like Egypt, because Egypt was just across the Red Sea from where Abdul Ghani was. Thirdly, an earthquake that took place in Sham. Its enormity is something that the chroniclers of the time mentioned. It was indescribable, such that the earth moved and the mountains looked as though they were shifting. Not a wall remained standing in Nablus, in the town or the city where Abdul Ghani was living. Not a wall remained standing because it fell due to the earthquake. Fourthly, the stars shook and wavered in the sky, in the skies over Baghdad in the beginning of the year 599 after the Hijrah, and in the east and the west of the city. So wherever the people of Baghdad, they were looking, they would look up into the sky and they could see the stars were shaking. They were wavering in the skies. And they mentioned, the chroniclers of the time, that they mentioned that the sky looked as if there were locusts in the sky. And this continued for the whole day or the whole evening up until Fajr. And the people were in a state of confusion and turmoil and calling out to Allah in supplication. Then alongside all of these occurrences, and of course there were many other occurrences, and we mentioned the decline of Banu al-Abbas and whatever else was taking place at the time. Alongside all of these occurrences, the age was still not empty of a Ta'ifa who were upon the haqq, upon the truth, steadfast and firm, calling the people to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, teaching it and spreading it across the world. So Allah chooses in every time and age great noble men of talent and expertise who serve His religion and spread His religion, whether it be the sincere scholars who act upon that which they know and lead by example, or they are kings, they are sultans or traders. It is for this reason we see schools everywhere in the Islamic world and ministries supporting them. And the scholars are the leaders of goodness, and they are the great illuminaries of guidance, the guardians of Islam, protecting it from tabdeel, or protecting it from change and alteration and tahrif and distortion that is cast at it at the hands of the enemies of Islam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even through the ages of turmoil, such as Sheikh Islam ibn Taymiyyah a few centuries later, as we mentioned, Abdul Ghani died in the year, Al-Maqdisi rahimahullah al-Hafidh, he died in the year 600. Ibn Qudama, Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama died in 620. Sheikh Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala died in 728 after the Hijrah. And you see, and of course you have the likes of other scholars, in between and after, Ibn Qayyim, Ibn Abdul Hadi and others, Ibn Kathir al-Dhahabi. And even before that era, the likes of As-Sabuni 2 centuries earlier. And you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter how hard things become and what kind of turmoil is taking place in the ummah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always raises for this ummah a ta'ifa. Al-haqq dhahirin, upon the truth, manifest in every age. And that has not ceased to occur right up until this era. So we have, even as we speak, we have Sheikh al-Fawzan and Sheikh Rabi' and Sheikh Abdul Muhsin. And we have ulama that are alive, that Allah, and of course, as time goes on and as the hour comes closer, then they are fewer and fewer in number. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, which is marfu', that you are living in an age in which the scholars are many and the speakers are few. And there will come a time when the scholars will be few and the speakers will be many. So the khutaba of our times, meaning those who are just rabble, just talking and chatting, without ilm and without guidance and without study, then they are many in number and the ulama are few. And that is from the signs of the hour. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, from the Asharatu Sa'a, from the signs of the hour, is that knowledge will be raised and ignorance will become widespread. When knowledge is raised and ignorance becomes widespread, then what's going to happen? Sin will increase. So if you look at any society where there are no scholars, or the scholars are very few, or even in this time of the ummah when the scholars are very few, sins are more prevalent. In any society where there is no ilm, and there are no people who are guiding, there are no scholars or there are no students of knowledge who are guiding the people, you find that sins are more widespread in any society. So you can have as many doctors as you want who can, look at your abdan and look at your ajsam, look at your bodies and look at your limbs. You can have 1 million doctors, they can fix your outer body, but who's going to fix your heart? So the purification of the hearts and the guidance of the hearts, of course, even though it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the knowledge that is conveyed to those hearts is done by whom? Is done by the scholars. That's why Sufyan al-Thawri said that indeed the angels are the guardians of the heavens and Ahlul Hadith are the guardians of the world. They guard the world from distortion and change and misguidance from the people of bid'ah. So this is the role of the ulama, barakallahu feekum. They protect this religion. So when the ulama become few, then you will see destruction. Or if the ulama are suppressed as they were in the time of Ahmad, and you saw bid'ah become widespread. In the time of Barbahari, when Barbahari was given strength, and he was allowed to speak and give da'wah, Ahlul Hadith was strong. Ashabul Hadith, those upon the Aqidah Salafiyya, were powerful and strong in the time of Al-Marwazi, Wal-Marrudhi, from the students, from the ashab of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And it is said, it was because of the strength of the likes of Ahlul Hadith that the likes of Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, he saw Ahlul Hadith and he saw that they were apparent, the haqq was apparent amongst them. And maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that he saw them and that was a sabab of his guidance. Because you could go to someone and learn the Aqidah Salafiyya, Aqidah of Ahlul Hadith, because it was himself, meaning Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in 324 after the Hijrah, that he himself in the Muqaddimah of his tremendous work in Aqidah, which was his final book, by the way, Al-Ibana and Usul al-Diyana, the final work of Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari. So he spent, at the age of 40, he repented from i'tizal. Then after that, meaning from the ideas of the Mu'tazila and denying the attributes of Allah, then he repented again from the deviations of Abdullah ibn Kullab, who died approximately a century before him. And then he came and he said, I'm upon what Ahmad ibn Hanbal was upon. Which means what? The works and the Aqidah of Ahmad ibn Hanbal was apparent. So when the words of the scholars and the Aqidah of the scholars is out there apparent for the people to study and to learn, and their hearts are open to the truth and sincere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they are truly sincere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide them. So upon that, inshallah, I'll finish at that point with the introduction of the explanation of Umdahtul ahkaam, and we'll conclude that inshallah next week. And then we can start the book itself, inshallah, with the rulings of the Sharia.